I like that meme. Moses casually taking advantage of the fiery bush, hanging out, roasting his marshmallows. It seems that he's taken the command to remove his shoes as an invitation to just relax and chill out. In the meme, God is not so sure that Moses is even aware that God is on the scene. Apparently, the Moses of this meme really doesn't find a fiery bush that talks to him as anything that's shocking or captivating. It does make you laugh, doesn't it? And I think it's because if we're really honest with ourselves, we probably relate to the Moses of that meme more than we do to the Moses of Scripture. But our purpose over these next few weeks is to walk in the footsteps of Moses, the Moses of Scripture, to discover where our lives and vocations line up with the story of God's calling out of this reluctant and unlikely prophet, and who ultimately collaborates with God to bring the oppressed Israelites into the promised land. This story challenges us to humbly and reverently take off our shoes and spend some serious time with God today and every day. Today we discover what Moses' burning bush experience has to teach us as individuals and as a church. Now, I'm guessing that most of us have never had a literal encounter with a burning shrub, but is it possible that figurative burning bushes show up in all sorts of ways if we're willing to pay attention? Last week we began with the courageous rescue of the infant Moses through the faithful defiance of 4 women along with Moses' sister. Moses was saved from the diabolical death sentence of the Pharaoh and was adopted by his daughter, raised in the Pharaoh's household as one of Pharaoh's grandsons. Although Exodus doesn't tell us much about Moses' early life, the Jewish rabbinic tradition is that Moses learned everything Egyptian wisdom had to offer, and he was a man of powerful words and deeds. But now, here in these scriptures, we find Moses living out in the desert, working as a shepherd. What happened to the Moses of Pharaoh's court? Exodus indicates that Moses did know that he was adopted and that his own people were the Hebrews. In chapter 2, we read that Moses, now an adult, went out among his people and saw their forced labor. He sees a Hebrew taskmaster an Egyptian taskmaster abusing a Hebrew. And his compassion for the Hebrew and his outrage at the Egyptian build, and he loses control and he murders the Egyptian. Pharaoh finds out and tries to kill Moses. So Moses must escape, run into the desert, and eventually he settles down in the land of Midian. There, he demonstrates once again that at his core, he's a man of deep compassion and courage to act out on behalf of those who have been bullied, oppressed, diminished. As he arrives in Midian, he comes upon some women who are trying to feed their sheep or water them at a well, and there are bullies there who are harassing the women, and so Moses, in his character, stands up against them, chases them away, and so the women, out of gratitude and wonder, invite Moses home with them, and later he becomes a part of their family, and that's how he becomes a shepherd in the land of Midian. So now for 40 years, Moses dwells here in the desert as a Midianite shepherd. And it's as if the life he knew is totally erased. And I imagine that Moses, for a good deal of time, spends time trying to push down the regret, the shame, the isolation that he feels. For Moses, these are also perhaps a time to learn some truths about himself, about who he really is, and a time for looking back, taking stock of his life. So, as you reflect on your life, do you recognize particular stages or seasons? Maybe you remember a season of learning followed by a season of great challenge, or a season of healing followed after a season of illness, a season of caregiving followed by a season of professional development. As you look back at these seasons, can you recognize God's presence in them, weaving together all of the yearnings of your heart as well as your gifts, and at the same time culling out all of the junk, preparing you for that next season of fruitfulness? Before I experienced a call to full-time ministry as a pastor, I went through a season of deep questioning. I found myself testing everything I ever believed about God and about the Bible. The belief systems that had structured my life before totally collapsed. I even questioned the very existence of God and whether there was indeed any purpose for living. I am especially grateful for the people God placed in my life during that time to help me through the season. And as I look back on it, though it felt like a terrifying, dark tunnel, it was something that I had to go through in order to find myself on the other side of a deeper and broader faith and relationship with God. I found a relationship that invited much more joy and freedom than I had ever known before. Seasons are necessary and natural as a part of life, but we do need companions to walk with us through them, and we need to companion others. So who are your faith companions? I hope through the various ways that we continue to offer group study and fellowship, service and worship at Desert Skies, that you have found here reliable and faithful companions in faith. And maybe during this time you've lost the connection or just postponed, procrastinating the reaching out. Remember that at Desert Skies, our very purpose is to love each other in caring community, to learn together to follow Jesus, and to help each other to commit to living a Christ-like life that serves the world. All of these things we do together, even under the conditions of separation. Now, Scripture doesn't tell us who was walking with Moses during this season. It's one of those places where we just have to wonder. I think it was perhaps his father-in-law, the Midianite priest, who shows up more prominently later in the story. So now, after 40 years of this kind of wilderness for Moses, the time is right. We learn in Scripture that the old Pharaoh has died, but the Israelites are still groaning under the oppression, calling out for relief. And God sees that Moses' heart is tuned for just this moment. And so one day, while Moses is out tending the sheep, doing what he's done for 40 years, he notices something different out of the corner of his eye. He turns and looks and sees that it's something glowing. He wonders what it could be, who else could be out here. It seems like a fire. As he continues to gaze and move closer, he realizes, man, this fire isn't going out. It isn't spreading, and it isn't burning stuff up. What kind of fire could this be? And it is then, when God has given Moses time to choose to attend, that he then calls out to Moses, 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 come closer. Take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. Isn't it appropriate that God's presence is portrayed as an unquenchable fire? Don't you imagine that it was more than the sight of that fire that captured Moses' attention as he moved closer? I think the flame of God's presence mirrored the burning, latent compassion in Moses' heart. And here we see how God's greatest big design for good becomes particular in the gifts of human beings. How many of us have felt the fire of anger of some injustice that we've experienced or seen? Or known the heat of fire in our bellies when we see others suffering? It may even happen when we take a friend to the doctor's office and see them treated with disrespect, or try to help someone figure out what their medical coverage is and recognize the injustice of such a complex payment system. It could happen at the grocery store when we see a bedraggled young mother slyly put back that package of meat because their food stamps just won't stretch that far. We may even feel it these days when we witness a friend being raked over the coals because they express their beliefs about an issue on Facebook. Holy fire burns in each one of us. It is who we are as God's own. True, sometimes it lies latent, only to burst open at just that intersect of suffering and compassion. And yes, it often takes us by surprise. One of the things that I love to do as I'm preparing for a sermon is to spend some time thinking about what my questions are about that text. And then I like to go out and find people to talk to about it. And I especially love when I can have a chance encounter with someone who is not part of a church. That happened to me the other day in relation to this story. I met Connie out in Vail. She knew that I was a pastor, but I was asking her about what her vocation was. And as she talked about it, I could just see her eyes light up. And so that led me to ask, Connie, how did you get to this place? How did you choose this vocation? And as she began to tell me, I recognized this was a story of a burning bush, of an incident that happened where she recognized that her life needed to take a 180-degree turn and go in the other direction. And she said to me, I could have never imagined 10 years ago doing what I'm doing today. But I have never felt more alive and fulfilled because I see that the work I do helps other people to find renewal and new life. It was really kind of funny because I had shared also that I was working on this sermon about Moses and the burning bush. And Connie is not part of a church, but she, like many people in the world, do know who Moses is. So I asked her, can you tell me the burning bush experience? And she sort of shifted the conversation, and she said, you know what I've learned? I've learned that everyone has a story. You have a burning bush story, even though it might not look like the one that Moses had. Burning bush experiences appear over and again in our lives, and we can take hold of them. We can see them as time to be with God on holy ground, to see them as our call to go, because God is going to use us in that moment. And so, I challenge you this week, read through the scripture, spend time with God, recognize that invitation to stand on holy ground is for you. It's a time to just be with God and listen and check in to where your heart and your passion are mirroring God's. And then don't be surprised if you hear, "Get going now, I'm going to use you." And when you do, what will you say to that burning bush? Amen.